થઈ ગયા જેટલા થવાનું હતું એટલે થઈ ગયા. Let us start. Ekta madam and Milan sir, let us start.
Yes,
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon to all the delegates from India, and I also welcome delegates from Indonesia, Greece, and Canada. It is pleasure to see you all here in this virtual platform. I am Ekta Patel, research scholar at Gujarat University under the mentorship of Professor Neeta H. Shah.
Hello everyone, I am Milan B. Patel, research scholar in the Department of Mathematics, Gujarat University, under the guideship of Professor Neeta H. Shah. I feel privileged to welcome all of you in this international webinar on emerging trends in sustainable supply chain management. This event is jointly organized by the Department of Mathematics, Gujarat University, Association of Inventory Academicians and Practitioners, and the Department of Operational Research, University of Delhi.
As we all know that management of supply chain plays a vital role for any business firm, therefore this webinar aims to bring together leading academic researchers to exchange and share their experience and research on various aspects of supply chain management. It also provides a platform for researchers, practitioners, and educators to learn the most recent innovations, trends, and concerns, as well as practical challenges encountered and solutions adopted in the field of supply chain management. In spite of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we are fortunate that today we all can be a part of such an intellectual event that keeps our mind active and improves our productivity.
So we have divided all talks in two sessions. The first session is from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. today, and second one will be tomorrow with the same timing as per the Indian Standard Time. So firstly, I would like to introduce our program chair, Dr. Ravi Gorsur. Dr. Gaur is a PhD in mathematics from India and postdoctoral fellow of the Department of Business Administration, University of New Brunswick, Canada. He is coordinator of the 5-year integrated MSc programs on artificial intelligence and machine learning, data science and actuarial science, as well as MSc in applied mathematical science. He has 60 publications, 12 books, 4 of which are used as course text in the area of management, engineering, and computer science, and several book chapters in his credits. He received Outstanding Service Award by the Industrial Engineering and Operations Management Society, USA. He is also conferred as Honorary Fellow by the Indian Institute of Material Management. He has been awarded Postgraduate Mathematical Science Teacher Award by Gujarat Science Academy. The open educational resources on operations research prepared by him have found place in the digital repository of Commonwealth of Learning, Canada, and the National Science Digital Library, India. So, Gorsur, I now request you to please give a welcome speech. Dr. Gorsur.
Very good afternoon to all the colleagues who have joined and all the guests, invited speakers, and the researchers across the globe who have joined for the conference today. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Gujarat University Department of Mathematics. And we all colleagues welcome you all for this 2-day deliberations on sustainable supply chain management practices. It is indeed a very important and apt topic. But before let's look at some statistics that we have been receiving and why I feel very happy to share with you that almost 430 researchers are joining in these 2 days with us, and we have received almost 430 registrations across pan India. Plus, we have delegates joining us from Indonesia, Nepal, Bangladesh, Taiwan, Tanzania, Mexico, Greece, and Canada. As far as the registrations go, uh, it's really a very Herculean task to organize such talks and getting in the pool of all the researchers from across the globe. But I congratulate my mentor and our head of the department, Professor Neeta Shah, for taking such a Herculean task in her hands. And she has really carried on a series of such conferences throughout the pandemic period that we have been. It's so happy to listen to all the speakers, and amidst all the gloom that we have been witnessing and experiencing in the past 1 year, I think such research deliberations give us some food for thought and divert our mind to something else. So I congratulate Neeta madam for that. uh, Again, I welcome all of you for these 2 day deliberations. Uh, when the whole program was envisioned by our Professor Neeta Ben, uh, it's needless to say that sustainability itself is a very complex word. So when we talk of sustainability, so we are saying, is it responsibility? Is it something that we have to carry on? Is it a process? Is it a robust process? So what is sustainability? And you all have been hearing a lot of things about the sustainability development goals 2030 also. So people are well aware about the SDGs nowadays. Uh, so when it comes to supply chain, uh, researchers have progressed from working in the inventory to transportations to logistics and now to robust supply chains. Now, when we talk about the sustainable supply chain, which is itself a supply chain itself is a complex network, and now we are adding one more layer of complexity with the word sustainability. So what are we trying to say? What the idea is that how we as researchers can contribute to this whole very important area. So is it conservation of resources? Is it optimization of processes? Is it the product innovations that we are going to talk about? Or is it the reduction of cost? These are all the conventional supply chain goals that we have been setting in our various objective functions when we talk about supply chain practices. But these goals talk about the robustness, they talk about effectiveness, they talk about the efficiency. But when we talk about the sustainability aspect, so now it is the time when we really need to look at the reduction of the environmental hazards that have been occurring. So we need to talk about the the reduction in the carbon emissions. We need to talk about the stoppage of water wastage. We need to talk about promotion of energy conservation. Now, taking all these goals into our supply chain optimization, it makes the process and the problem itself quite complex, and we all know about it. But these are the need of the hour. We need to look at the carbon footprint. We need to look at how that emission can be reduced. So when it comes to all the operations processes that we have been talking in our literature, right from transportation to packaging to manufacturing to farming to the disposal of items to the retail management systems, we need to see how the carbon footprint can be reduced. For example, we stay around 400 kilometers, or let's say 300 miles away from the coastal areas. But when we want to drink fresh coconut water, we take coconut in our hands. Now, have we ever thought what is the carbon emission, what is the carbon footage that works, or how much carbon is being generated when such a product, such a fruit comes into our hands? So it's just a simple example that I am sharing. The clothes that we are wearing, how much water, how much energy, how much carbon has been emission, how much water has been wasted, how much energy has been wasted when we are trying to look at one 1 meter of cloth. So the measurement of all these things, and if you want to make it sustainable, then we need to understand that can we have sustainable systems in place? What is the cost of increase? What is the increased cost that will come up when we try to look at sustainable practices? So our objective functions will have to cater to all these kind of costs also. These are some of the deliberations that we had, me and madam had, when we were talking about organizing such a topic. And I'm sure with the wonderful speakers that we have from across the country, across the world, Professor Pujwan, I welcome you. I can see on the screen Professor Leopido. We welcome both of you, and we are very eager to. I can see Professor Pankaj Gupta is also in the house. So I welcome all of you. We are looking forward to learn and hear your views on the topic. And with this, I thank all the speakers for giving us time and sharing with us your practices and research. I would extend again a warm welcome to all the delegates from across the globe on behalf of the Department of Mathematics. And with this, I wish all of us a very, very 2 fruitful days of successful deliberations. Thank you so much. Over to you,
Thank,
Milan.
yeah, thank you very much, Gorsur, for such a detailed introduction regarding the theme of this webinar. Now, next we have among us Head of the Department of Operational Research, University of Delhi, Professor Pankaj Gupta, sir. So let me introduce him first. So Professor Gupta has visited several universities abroad for academic exchanges and research collaboration. He was a Boy Scouts Fellow at Department of Mathematics, Wayne State University, Detroit. He has published extensively in mathematical programming and optimization, focusing on portfolio optimization, fuzzy optimization, and multi-criteria optimization in allocation problems. His research appears in many well-known national and international journals. He has co-authored a research monograph on fuzzy portfolio optimization, published from Springer under the series Studies in Fuzziness and Soft Computing. So, Professor Pankaj Gupta, sir, I warmly welcome you to this platform, and I would like to request you to please deliver a welcome speech. Professor Gupta, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Milan. So my thanks to both the student, leaders, Ekta and Milan, for the introduction. And as you know, that Department of Operational Research is a co-organizer of this event. So, as a representative of the department in the capacity of head of the Department of Operational Research, we are proud to be associated with this event. And the credit goes to Professor Neeta Shah, Professor Gaur, and the team members associated with these two persons for taking initiative and organizing this webinar on a very you can say relevant theme, that is the emerging issues on in sustainable supply chain. So many of the speakers I can see from the list, they have visited our Department of Operational Research in Delhi University quite a number of times. But there are few others who have not been with the department, or have not visited the Department of Operational Research, University of Delhi. Okay, so I just to give you a brief introduction about the department, because I am being called here in the capacity of head of the Department of Operational Research. So it is my duty to just give you a brief about the Department of Operational Research, Delhi University. It is a pioneer in imparting the knowledge and skills in operational research to its students through its PG programs, that is the postgraduate programs and the research programs. And the supply chain management is one of the key area of research in the Department of Operational Research. Okay, and many people working in this area, they focus on optimization of processes or the inventory management or some other aspects of the supply chain operations. The Department of Operational Research has a long-standing reputation both locally and globally, which is also reflected in the number of collaborative research works that are being published by the faculty members of the Department of Operational Research. And most of the papers, they appear in reputed SCI index journals, which is also another reflection of the high standards of research followed in the Department of Operational Research. So this is a brief introduction about the department, and we would be very happy if the situation improves and there is a possibility of the speakers of this webinar coming and joining Department of Operation Research for academic collaboration and exchanges. Now, coming to the theme of the conference, this webinar, it's as I said, it is very appropriate, and Dr. Gaur has spoken, many things about the sustainability issues in general, and in particular for the supply chain operations. So, and I can see from the list of the invited speakers, each one of the speaker is a renowned expert in the field, and I'm quite sure that those who are joining this event, virtually through different media like the YouTube or the Facebook, the younger generation, they will definitely be benefited from the proceedings of this webinar, because the experts are very learned experts, and I'm sure that the deliberations will help them in focusing on the issues on sustainability issues in supply chain operations for their research work. uh, from my side, to just add on a few things regarding the theme of the conference, I would like to say that, as we all know, and in fact, Professor Gaur has already said about it, supply chain is basically a network of operations. Okay, so we really need to look at each of the operations, so that, because each operation has its bearing on the end result. So it is required that the integrated approaches should be used for optimizing individual operations or the processes of the supply chain operations, so that the end result can be, we can have a better end result. So the focus should be on building the integrated approaches rather than focusing, individually on operations like the inventory management, or maybe you can say the distribution part, or maybe the procurement parts and all that. The other thing that I would like to draw your attention to is like the major causes of disruption in supply chain operations. As we have seen, like in the COVID pandemic situation, which has now lasted for almost like 1.5 years, and we have seen the supply chain operations breaking down locally as well as globally. And the primary reason, the major cause of disruption was like almost like negligible demand. When the demand was almost zero demand, the supply chain operations had to be shut down, the production had to be stopped. While on the other side, the demand was so huge, the oversized demand, it could not be met by the companies, so they had to stall their supply chain operations for a while the customers were running from one place to another place to get the product and so on. So basically, one of the one of the major issues is to identify the causes of disruption, which we should focus on, so that we can build reliable supply chain models and they can work in unforeseen circumstances. Of course, anything cannot be 100% perfect, but we should try to, build such reliable supply chain models which can work well in unforeseen circumstances like the COVID-19 situation that emerged last year. And we can still have some reasonable, things going on. So I think the most of the talks which I saw from the list of speakers, they are focused on the inventory issues in the supply chain operations. But my suggestion is that we should like look at more integrated approaches, so that the individual operations can be combined and the end result can be much better than what we actually have at present. So with these words, I thanks once again Professor Neeta Shah, Professor Ravi Gaur, and the student organizers for taking initiative and organizing this webinar. And I welcome all the speakers who have come, who are joining this from different parts of the world, including our country. And each one of you is a renowned expert in the field. So I'm sure that the deliberations will be very, very productive. And I wish all the best to the organizers. And with these words, I hand over the platform to Milan Patel.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank
sir.
you very much, Professor Gupta, sir, for your words. So now I request Ekta Patel to introduce our keynote speaker. Over to you, Ekta.
Now let's begin today's session with the keynote address by Professor Neumann Pujwan. Professor Neumann Pujwan is a professor of supply chain engineering at the Department of Industrial Engineering, Sepuluh November Institute Technology, Indonesia. He received PhD in Management Science from Lancaster University, UK. He also holds Certified Supply Chain Professionals from APICS, USA. His papers have appeared in many high-profile international journals, including the European Journal of Operational Research, International Journal of Production Economics, International Journal of Production Research, and so on. He is currently the president of the Indonesia Supply Chain and Logistic Institute. He is the editor-in-chief of Operations and Supply Chain Management and in the editorial board of few other international journals. In the last few years, he is also teaching in few universities abroad, including Mahindo University, Mei Fah Luang University, and King Mangkut University of Technology, North Bangkok. He will be giving a talk on research in sustainable supply chain, achievement and aspiration. We are having a great opportunity to listen to the words by a great knowledgeable speaker, Professor Pujwan. Sir, I now request Sir to deliver your talk.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patel. Let me share my slide first. Okay. Do you see my slide now?
No, sir. No, Professor.
Not
Now
yet?
now it has come. Now it has come.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Shah, Dr. Ravi Gorsur, and all committee members who are organizing this excellent conference on sustainable supply chain. And I would like to present some high-level thought on the research which have been done in this area, in the sustainable supply chain, what have been done, and what are the aspirations. I'm Nyoman Pujawan, as already mentioned by Ms. Patel. Currently, I'm Professor of Supply Chain Engineering and Dean of the School of Interdisciplinary Management and Technology in one major public university in Indonesia. Right, so in the next 30 minutes, I would like to highlight the major works that people have done, but I'm not attempting to review extensively all the works that have been done, but rather I would like to highlight few important and interesting contribution, and then highlight some future research need in this area. Let me start with some early development on what we now refer to sustainable supply chain. I think at the beginning people were using multiple terms to address this issue. One was green supply chain management, and the other one is sustainable supply chain. If we look at some of the literature, there are few major differences in the definition of green supply chain and sustainable supply chain. While green supply chain is basically emphasizing on the environmental thinking, how to consider environmental issue in supply chain management, including when you are designing a product, sourcing materials, manufacturing the product, and finally delivering those products to the end customer. So basically, we focus on the environmental issue. But sustainable supply chain is somehow much more than that, because we are not only dealing or concerning about the environmental issue, but it is actually trying to combine three major concerns in any development, including when we are talking about business, which are the economic, environmental, and social issue of what many people actually refer to this as triple bottom line. So in any business, traditionally people were very much attempting to maximize the economic merit, to improve profitability, to reduce costs. But later on, we all agree, I think, in addition to achieving better profitability, enterprises need to also consider the environmental impacts and also the social impact. So the consideration of the social aspect is what actually basically differentiates between green supply chain and sustainable supply chain. I think, as was mentioned by Dr. Ravi Gorsur, I think he correctly mentioned about what we need to focus on when we are doing about research in the area of supply chain management, as we now trying to reduce energy consumption, to reduce the emission to the environment, probably also to use less materials in producing product, and also to produce less waste to the landfill. So that's why if we are talking about the environmental issue, there are a lot of practices now we know, like recycle, reuse, remanufacturing. Some people are talking about using hybrid production between manufacturing and remanufacturing together, or between more traditional and more green production facilities. And then we are also very much exposed to what is called reverse logistic, and also designed for re-X, where we actually have different types of X here, including reuse, recycle, remanufacturing, and repair. And also there are a lot of things discussed about green procurement, lean practices, and recently we are also very much exposed to the term like circular economy. All of these practices and also all of the works done by the academics are actually trying to improve the supply chain in such a way that supply chain management contribute to the shareholder by improving profitability, reducing the cost, but at the same time, we are also concerning the environment. And also, as the definition of the sustainable supply chain, as I mentioned before, we also need still to consider more on the social aspect in the supply chain management. So when we are talking about sustainability, whether it is only focusing on the environment, or actually we are extending our view on the environment as well as the social system, we are not only talking about end of life of the product, but we are talking through the whole life cycle of the product, starting from the product design. People who are designing the product actually are very much having contribution on whether or not we will achieve a sustainable supply chain. Because when you are designing product, you may need to think about what would you do when, for example, the product is already considered to be unusable, when it achieves or it reaches the end of life. Also, when you are designing a product, you also probably recommending what type of materials that you will be using, whether or not those materials are actually available in local sources or you need to import from other countries, because this will affect very much the environmental impact. For example, if it is always possible to source materials from local suppliers, then the environmental impact would always be much lower compared if you are, for example, importing the materials from other countries. And also in the production stage, we are talking about what kind of production technology that we are using. Is it possible actually to buy or to use green production technology, which somehow could be more expensive to invest at the beginning, but in the end, you are producing less emission and also use less energy to operate those machines, for example. So that goes on to the use stage and to the end of life. So when we are talking about sustainability in the context of supply chain, we are not only talking about the production stage. We are not talking about the end of life, but we are integrating the sustainability message to each stage of the product life cycle, starting from the design up to the end of life. So that is actually very much the concern of the sustainable supply chain management. The term sustainable supply chain, if we are looking at the literature, we actually very much, I would consider this is still quite new. I remember when in 2005, I was editing a special issue in International Journal of Production Economics. And at that time, we issued a special edition on sustainable supply chain management. At that time, when we were trying to search this term, we only saw a couple of publications that use the term sustainable supply chain. So it was very much new at the time. So it is less than 20 years if we are talking about today. But the development of the research work on sustainable supply chain is actually growing very much. These numbers, I was collecting these numbers a few days ago. I was trying to search the use of sustainable supply chain and two other terms, remanufacturing and reverse logistic, in two major journals that we consider are publishing a lot of works in this area. And these are the numbers that we have. So say, for example, the word sustainable supply chain in these two journals were not actually existent before 2000. And between 2001 and 2005, we only found two articles that use the term sustainable supply chain, and only one in the International Journal of Production Economics. That one was actually the call for papers that was published in International Journal of Production Economics, that I was one of the three special issue editors at the time. So very much if we are looking at the history of the use of term supply chain management, we consider that the period of 2006 and 2010 was actually the early growth, while between 2011 and 2015 is actually, I think, a massive growth. And in the last 5 years, we show a very big increase in the number of publications. Well, I'm not trying to say that we did an extensive search in the literatures, because I was just focusing on two journals. One was Journal of Cleaner Production, and the other one was International Journal of Production Economics, because I think these two journals publish really a lot of papers addressing sustainable supply chain management. If we compare, for example, with the terms remanufacturing and reverse logistic, I think they is slightly a little bit earlier than the use of the term sustainable supply chain. Because, for example, between 1996 and 2000, We have seen a couple of research publications that use the term remanufacturing and reverse logistics, but I think all of these three terms are actually increasing in a very high rate in the last 15 to 20 years, indicating that the interest on doing research work in the area of sustainable supply chain and the surrounding idea is actually very much increasing in the last 15 to 20 years. There are a couple of interesting publications. If you look at, for example, the early development in the area of sustainable supply chain and some other terms that are very much related. For example, these are the two articles that I consider to be the early contribution. Like, for example, the works by Guide et al., published in Informed Journal of Applied Analytics in 2000 with the title of Supply Chain Management for Recoverable Manufacturing System. And the second one, published in Computers and Chemical Engineering with the title of Supply Chain Optimization for Continuous Process Industry with Sustainable Consideration. Well, both of these articles did not specifically or explicitly mention the term sustainable supply chain, but I think implicitly what they do or what they publish are actually very much the idea of achieving more sustainable supply chain. All right, so if we look at some of the framework that people publish in the area of reverse logistics, sustainable supply chain, etc., I picked this one with a slight modification. The work published by Agrawal et al., 2015, they actually present a literature review on reverse logistics, where it is very interesting to see that the bottom part here is actually the forward logistic up to the consumer point. And then when the product is actually arriving at the final stage, end of life, then people would draw it out and collection will start there. When you are collecting the used product, you need to do what is called sorting, because the issue is that when you are collecting used product, not all of them are actually usable to further processing like repair, reuse, remanufacturing, and recycle. Then in that case, you need to do a disposal. Even you are talking about disposal, you still need to do what is called proper disposal when we are talking about sustainable supply chain management. I would like to focus a little bit on few aspects. One is on remanufacturing, because I have a few students have been doing research on remanufacturing in the last few years, where remanufacturing, if we look at that framework again, is one possible treatment of the used product, where remanufacturing normally require extensive work, like complete disassembly of the product and replace the few components. And then finally, when you're done, the product is considered to be as good as new. That would differentiate from the repair, because if you are doing repair work, then you don't really need to do complete disassembly, and the result would not be as good as new. But in remanufacturing, by theory, by concept, we know that the result will be as good as new product. So we have students who try to model remanufacturing. So we use a simple diagram, but one of my students were trying to model pricing and channeling issue in remanufacturing product, because obviously when we talk about remanufacturing product, people said that the quality of the product is as good as new, but there is an issue about the pricing. Would the price to be set exactly the same as the new product, because we know that the quality of the product is considered to be as good as new? Or would you try to offer a discount price, because when people know that your product is actually a result of remanufacturing, they would probably tend not to buy remanufacturing product if there is an alternative to buy a totally new product. So we have a couple of publications in this area. If you are interested, you can have a look at the works that we have done. One was pricing decision for new and remanufacturing product in a closed loop supply chain, but we also consider using separate sales channels. Another one is actually addressing the issue of the quality of the used product that we are collecting, because as I mentioned earlier, when you are collecting the used product, the quality of those used product would not be the same from time to time. Sometimes you get a good enough quality, but in other situation, probably the quality is very low, and in that situation, you probably unable to use it for further remanufacturing. If you look further on the publication in the area of remanufacturing, there are a couple of streams that are very much interesting to see and then to develop further. This is not supposed to be extensive classification. So I pick a few interesting categories. One, for example, is the issue of the pricing. As I mentioned earlier, when you are talking about remanufacturing product, there is a decision that you need to make regarding what is your pricing decision. Would the product will be offered at the same price, or you are differentiating the price? Secondly, we may talk about sales channeling, whether you are offering those two products, new and remanufacturing, into exactly the same sales channel, or you are going to differentiate the sales channels. That's number two. Number three is about the quality of the used product that you collected. The quality and the quantity are always uncertain. Unlike if you are sourcing the virgin materials from your suppliers, here I think you have a high level of uncertainty of the quality as well as the quantity. So that's why it is also interesting to address this issue. And one of the publication of my student was actually trying to address the differentiation of the quality and quantity of the collected product from time to time. And then there is another publication and quality grading. And then another issue is on government subsidy or incentive, because it is very sensible actually to say that when you are offering both new and remanufacturing product, if your government is actually attempting to foster more people to use remanufacturing product, then probably it is a good idea for the government to subsidy those remanufacturing product. And there are a couple of publications in this area already, which I think it is very important. Yeah, and then trade in is also another alternative. So you can trade in the used product with the new product as a result of remanufacturing. And then there are some works that also address on the warranty issue. And finally, also on using hybrid manufacturing facilities. When you talk about remanufacturing, the problem is that probably when you don't have enough or sufficient materials from time to time, it would not be sensible to invest in a dedicated remanufacturing facilities, but rather you would consider using the same common facility to do both manufacturing and remanufacturing together, because that in the end would reduce the risk of low facility utilization in your manufacturing facility. That was about remanufacturing. Another work that people already very much doing is about reverse logistics. I think most of you understand that reverse logistics is basically trying to return back the product from the point of consumption back to the point of origin, to the point where you will do something about the defective product, the rejected product by customer, for example, for the purpose of recapturing value or proper disposal. So there are always two options there. If you can do anything about that, you probably try to recapture the value. But if not, because the quality of the used product is too low, then you go for disposal. But again, even if you are talking disposal, you need to do it properly. So that is what reverse logistics. There are a lot of streams of the research that people have done in the area of reverse logistics. There are a very large majority out of this research are actually talking about network design by using, for example, mixed integer programming and other types of modeling. So by far, I think if you are looking at publication in the area of network design related to reverse logistics, you will see a lot of papers in this area. And then in the second category, you will see the integration between forward and reverse logistic. And then there are also people who are trying to do risk analysis on reverse logistic, also information sharing, outsourcing. Why outsourcing is important here? Because not all supply chain are actually having capability in handling reverse logistic. So somehow there are companies who develop this capability, and these companies are offering services to support any supply chain that requires services in doing reverse logistics. So that's why outsourcing is something also interesting in the area of reverse logistics. Now, in terms of modeling, because I know that most of you are actually in the area of mathematics or modeling area, I'm not actually trying to go into details into the formula, etc. But there are a lot of opportunities for people who are expert in modeling actually to involve in supply chain sustainability issue. If you look at the publication, a large majority of papers who are published in the journals like Production Economic, European Journal of Operational Research, Computer Operation Research, etc., are actually quantitative types of analysis, developing a kind of models to support decision in the area of supply chain management, sustainable supply chain management. They could be using single objective optimization, multi-objective optimization, like goal programming, for example, game theory, very much used for pricing issue, multi-echelon inventory models, fuzzy optimization approach, and there are also some works that use simulation modeling. So in looking at the contribution to date, I think we are confident to say that the contribution of those people who are trying to develop models, who work on the quantitative side of sustainable supply chain management have been tremendous up to this point, and the number is growing very much rapidly in the last few years. But what are our future aspirations? What we still need to do in the future is that we need actually to make better impacts, because we do research, but those research would be expected to be useful in real life to improve the practice. Yeah, unless we could actually influence the practice to make the world of this world more sustainable, the supply chain more sustainable, then our work are actually of limited value. And I think people are talking about shifting now from shareholder to stakeholder wealth when you are talking about supply chain. I'm very happy actually that people are now talking about not only maximizing profitability, not only reducing costs of your internal supply chain activities, but rather you are also considering how to reduce the emission, how to improve the well-being of people who are involved in your supply chain. Are your suppliers are actually getting enough revenue to build their capability, etc.? So sustainable supply chain may not be enough actually to name those aspirations. But I would rather say that in addition to sustainable supply chain, we also need to think about responsible supply chain, because we actually need those people who work in the area of supply chain are actually paid well. They have a good standard of living, etc. So we need to think about the system, supply chain as a system, or even more appropriately, probably we call it as an ecosystem that consists of those multiple parties. You have suppliers working with you. We have people working as your employee. You are employing a truck driver. We are actually charting the capacity in a train. You are bringing your product to distributors and finally to the end customer. All of these parties actually need to be considered. So rather than just minimizing the cost or maximizing the profitability in one stage of this supply chain players, we need rather to maximize the fairness, maximize the well-being of everybody on every party who are involved in the supply chain. So that would be our challenge in the future. How the modeling work will address this challenge in the future would be a big question that we need to address in the future. So I think finally we need to very much refer to what is called sustainable development goals. There are 17 goals that are formulated by the United Nations. And I'm sure that our work in the supply chain management will need to address at least few of the goals that are already stated by the United Nations. I think that's all. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again. I hope that what I'm presenting here is giving you some aspiration or some ideas of your future works in the area of sustainable supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your profound knowledge with us. Thank you so much, sir.
Professor Pujwan very rightly said how to have a effective, sustainable supply chain. And some of the Indian researchers are still working on socially responsible supply chain. And one of the speakers is also with us, Professor Sivraj Singh. Professor Sana is also working on economically and socially responsible supply chain. So participants, Professor Pujwan has given us a good hint about not only about the sustainable supply chain, what it is, but he also talked about green supply chain and what one can do in having green environment, and that is what is the need of the time. So thank you, Professor Pujwan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That is great news.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. So participants, if you have any question regarding the ongoing talk, so you can just comment in YouTube or the Facebook section from where you are attending this webinar. We will bring your question to the speaker. If you have any question, you can just write down.
Milan sir, we will give them time. We will give them time. If it is for the Pujwan sir, we will take it later on.
Okay,
after,
sure.
After one more talk.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so let us move on to the next speaker. So our next distinguished person is Professor Neeta H. Shah from Gujarat University, India. Professor Shah is HOD of the Department of Mathematics, Gujarat University, India. She received her PhD in statistics from Gujarat University in 1994. She is a postdoctoral visiting research fellow of the University of New Brunswick, Canada. Her research interests include inventory modeling in supply chain, robotic modeling, mathematical modeling of infectious disease, image processing, dynamical system and its applications, etc. She has published more than 475 peer-reviewed research papers in high-impact journals like Elsewhere, Inner Science, and Taylor and Francis journals. She has authored 18 books and has successfully completed 3 UGC-sponsored projects. According to the Google Scholar, the total number of citation is over 3,416 and the maximum number of citation for a single paper is over 190. The H index is 25 and the I-10 index is 86 till June 2021. Having guided 28 PhD students and 15 MPhil students, she received the Best PhD Guide Award from AIMS 2019 and the Best Paper Award from Gujarat Science Congress in 2020. She is Fellow of ISCA and AIMS. She is also a council member of Indian Mathematical Society and the President of Operational Research Society of India, Ahmedabad chapter. So now I invite Professor Shah to give her talk on manufacturer distributor supply chain for vaccine with carbon emission dependent demand. Over to you, Nita ma'am.
Thank you, Milan sir. Before I start my talk, I welcome Professor Sivraj, Professor Beren, and Georgios. Let me share my screen first. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it is visible, ma'am.
Uh, from 3 onwards, Dr. Gaur, Professor Pankaj Gupta, and then our keynote speaker, Professor Pujwan, said what to do in supply chain, sustainable supply chain. So myself and my team is making an effort to have a manufacturer distributor supply chain for vaccine with carbon emission dependent demand. So we are moving towards a green sustainable supply chain. That is what is the objective of this particular talk. I said team, and team consists of Prateek Shah and Milan Patel. Milan Patel is one of the hosts in this virtual program. The flow of my presentation will be first, let us have some introduction. Though I will skip some of the introduction because it has been said by Professor Pujwan. As we said that we have a manufacturer and distributor. So manufacturer model should be discussed, distributor model, and then we will have a supply chain model, and then we'll have some managerial insights. So here,
Ma'am, are you on the first slide now?
Mine is second.
Ma'am, just make a full screen. I cannot see the second slide.
It is full screen. It is full screen, sir.
Ekta, are you able to see the full screen?
No, sir.
It's not full screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Now?
Not yet, ma'am.
What about now?
No,
No, ma'am.
ma'am.
Choose
Okay,
slideshow and start from here.
It is a slide. So let me go with this one. Now is can you see flow of presentation?
Yes,
Can you?
Yes.
Okay, let's go with this only.
Fine.
First, we will have introduction. I will skip some part of the introduction. We will have manufacturer model, distributor model. Manufacturer model is the one where vaccine is getting manufactured. Then distributor model, we will talk about the state who is purchasing it and then passing it on to the POD, that is at disposal point, that is those who are supposed to take the vaccine. And then we will have a supply chain model, and lastly we will go for the managerial insights. What we most of the countries are severely affected by climate change problem, and these countries frequently face many disasters like heavy storms, flood, and heat waves. overall, the impact of climate change are clearly visible around the globe, and natural calamities may be the process of this climate change responsible for the climate change. The average temperature level is steadily rising every year. Just day before yesterday, there was a news in Times of India that average temperature raised by 0.009, and just for mathematical person, 9 into 10 raised to minus 2 is a very slow number, very small number. But when it goes for the global level, it is huge number. And this overnight growth of, and what is the responsible factor? That is the overnight growth of industries and modern technologies have improved living standards of people and also provided distinguishable control comfort level in day-to-day life. But on the other side, the negative point is they have damaged environment and ecology system on a large scale. And that's the reason why blue economy is getting attracted on the seashore inventory management. This is because most of the industry units are concerned only about the cost cutting and financial growth. All industries, as most of them, maybe you can say 97%, they are concerned about the profit of the industry. That is what we say, cost cutting and financial growth. As a result, these industrial units are pushing the globe to natural calamities. It damages ozone layer, toxic and polluted environment because they throw away toxic pollutants and chemicals wherever they want, global warming, ice melting in polar regions, and main effect one can see in Antarctica. In 1997, many countries came forward on a platform to discuss possible solutions of climate change, and they signed United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they call it as a Kyoto Protocol to reduce the carbon emission level. And this Kyoto Protocol forced the industries to design machineries and to formulate the strategies that control carbon emission level at each stage of the inventory system. Under the carbon emission regulations, industries have to pay certain amount of tax for each unit of carbon gases produced by them or throw it in the environment. Therefore, carbon emission regulations affect managerial policies and decisions, because if they don't follow Kyoto Protocol, then they will have to pay a huge penalty. Thus, while designing sustainable inventory control system, inventory managers need to implement green supply chain. Even researchers who focus on maximizing profit or minimizing total cost associated with the system. But now, due to this pandemic, scenario has changed. In the present time, inventory managers need to focus on green and sustainable environmental conditions also. So we are moving away from the traditional supply chain modeling. While traditional production system, it is very tough to reduce the carbon emission. So we need to how to reduce this carbon emission is the major task. The optimum use of energy can develop an efficient supply chain. Thus, production rate. So on what factor I should have control, and that is on production. Production rates should be variable in order to utilize maximum energy and reduce the carbon emission. So here we are giving joint inventory policies for a supply chain with single manufacturer and single distributor who are dealing with vaccination program. Manufacturer is the one who produces vaccine and distributor are the states who are receiving them, who are borrowing from the manufacturer. Product demand is sensitive to the amount of carbon emissions. Vaccines in the system spoil at a constant rate because all these vaccines taken up from the company goes to the state level, getting stored, and during the whole transportation logistic route, some of the vaccine do get spoiled. Maybe because of mishandling, maybe where they are stored, the storage is not maintaining its temperature to be minus 6 degrees centigrade. That is what it should be minimum for vaccine in India. Manufacturer adopts flexible manufacturing process and lot for lot manufacturing policy in order to respond quickly to the distributor demand. Here manufacturer, because we are talking about the vaccine manufacturer, they cannot store it for a longer time. They have to distribute it because of the need of the present scenario. Keeping effective energy consumption into account, production rate should be considered to be a variable, and we'll see on which factors it depends. Here, we try to find out what should be the optimum procurement quantity of the vaccines depending upon the demand. And this demand we have taken as the registrations done for the vaccinations and production time for the manufacturer, as well as number of shipments and cycle time for the distributors in order to minimize total cost of a supply chain. So we have demand rate to be A minus KY, where A is registered individuals for the vaccination. I'm talking about the first dose only. K is obviously non-negative and carbon emission markup. Y is the total amount of carbon emission produced in different stages of the supply chain. That is from the manufacturer to the person who is going to take vaccination. Okay, so I already said that vaccines spoil with a constant rate of theta. In the previous slide, we said that production costs should be function of production because it depends upon the raw material. So cost of raw material should be taken into account. Labor costs and energy costs. Labor or machine cannot work for all 24 hours. So, and that also utilizes energy. So second term is labor costs and energy costs. And above and all, when any instrument or human being is working for 24/7, then tool and die cost will be associated with this variable production. So first, let us have the manufacturer model. Vaccines spoil at a constant rate. The manufacturer produces the vaccine with a production rate P. Demand rate is sensitive to the amount of carbon emission produced in the supply chain. Manufacturer is going to use lot for lot production. So as soon as vaccine is ready, it will be delivered to the states in number of shipments. So let us have the total cost of the manufacturer. Manufacturer has to have setup costs, then production costs, item cost, and holding cost. This holding cost may be only for the small period of time. Then we have distributor model. Distributor receives total vaccines from the manufacturer in n shipments at a regular time interval of T1 time. So how many times shipment is to be done? That is T1 is equal to T by N, where capital T is the cycle time or production time of the manufacturer, and T1 is the production time when state or distributor will have no vaccine in his storage. Inventory level of the distributor depletes due to the demand and spoilage of the vaccine. So this distributor will have to have three different costs. Obviously, transportation costs, that is ordering costs, purchase costs or item costs, and holding costs. They will be storing it in the storage, deep freezes, large freezes. So for n number of times, so total cost of the distributor is n times ordering costs, item costs, and holding costs. Now we are ready to have carbon emission cost of a supply chain. Supply chain is of distributor and manufacturer. Now let us see where carbon emission should be taken up. In general, carbon emission is produced during setup process, transportation, holding process, production, deterioration, and you increase the parameters, your carbon emission factors will also increase. The amount of carbon emission produced for the supply chain involving the manufacturer and the distributor per unit cycle will be. It is here. The first one is carbon emission created by manufacturer. Now, what are the components from where you can have carbon emission? Obviously, first, during the transportation of raw material. Second term is when it is stored, no doubt for a smaller time, because we say that manufacturer is following lot to lot production rate, and then during the manufacturing one. Then the next term is carbon emission at the distributor end. When vaccine comes to distributor using any of the mode, maybe air, then road, or during the holding it, because most of the vaccines are to be held in the deep freezes, and deep freezes emits carbon emission 24/7 and huge carbon emission. We'll see in the status. And the last one, last term is during procurement quantity. So on this carbon emission, either by manufacturer or distributor, we have to have carbon tax. Okay, so carbon tax on carbon emission is to be levied at CT. In the sense, carbon tax is nothing but the penalty to the manufacturer and distributor as per the amount of carbon emission produced by them. So total cost of the supply chain will be the manufacturer's total cost, distributor's total cost, and carbon emission cost. So first one is now total cost of the total supply chain. So first term is for the manufacturer. Then second one is for the distributor, and the third one, big one, is carbon tax, which is to be levied to the manufacturer and distributor. So these are the terms. Okay. Now with the data we have from the website, shows that optimal transshipment or shipments should be 3. Okay. And production time at the company level requires 62 days. Total cost of supply chain turns out to be $31,085. And from that, manufacturer total cost is $14,872, and that of distributor is $15,659. Here, optimum production turns out to be 889. This 889 is in terms of vials. Each vial consists of 100 units. And the carbon emission cost turns out to be $554, and they emit this $554 is for the emission units 276.74. I hope you can see my slide number 25.
No, it is on 23 number. Yes, it is okay now.
Okay.
Yes.
Now here we are saying what are the changes which we will have when we change manufacturer cost and distributor cost. Okay, so on x-axis we have varied the cost. We have dual y-axis. On the left side y-axis we have total cost, and on right side y-axis we have the total time. So for both, one can see that when we increase the item costs of the manufacturer, total cost of manufacturer will increase. That is quite obvious, because if raw material comes from abroad, then they have to pay a huge amount for that. And as a result, total cost of the supply chain will also increase. And that is what is green portion is total cost of the supply chain. And similar scenario we have when item cost from the distributor end is taken into picture. Okay. Now here we have a variation in carbon emission at the manufacturer end. You can see that carbon emission is maximum when procurement cost for the carbon emission due to procurement is maximum at manufacturer end. Okay. Rest part still we can take up, and even the second major component is transportation cost or setup cost when we are talking about the manufacturer. Similarly, for distributor end, the emission cost is highest and it increases when ordering cost of the distributor is increasing. And that may be because of petrol or diesel vehicles which they are using may be too old, and that is creating carbon emission at a huge level. So overall, what it says that an eco-friendly production and distribution system is possible with mutual coordination of supply chain players for vaccine distribution, and that will help in reducing the carbon emission and leads to environmentally sound manufacturing and distribution process, which is the need of the present time. Though one feels that in the present scenario, why we should think about the reduction in carbon emission, but to have the vaccination program at a greater speed. But friends, this carbon emission either at the manufacturer end or at the distributor end will spoil environment also, will damage environment also, and that will overall maybe say in the later stage that may affect our system also, living system also. So this is, if you have any question, you can write down in the chat box, and thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. Ma'am, we have one question from Dr. Dharmendra Yadav, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you see that in the comment box?
Yeah, I can see. Dr. Dharmendra is asking, in case of deterioration, certain fraction of jab which is given to us are not perfect, as there is uh, no Dr. Yadav, when you are talking about the vaccination, even no spoilage, no deterioration is permissible. They have to be thrown away at a salvage cost. But when you throw it away, that also creates carbon emission. I hope, Dr. Dharmendra, is my answer satisfactory to your question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So, is there any other
Thank you, ma'am.
question from our respective speakers?
Yeah, optimality, and Dr. Umakant is asking about the optimality. See, optimality has been proved. It has not been kept in the slides, but at present, you have to have compromising situation, in the sense, even if you don't have optimal solution, you can go away with suboptimal solution.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am. So now I request Ekta Patel to proceed further.
Our next eminent speaker is Mr. Georgios. He is a PhD student in the Department of Mathematics at the University of Ioannina, Greece. He received his bachelor degree in mathematics and master in statistics and operation research. His research interests focus on supply chain management, particularly inventory system and under supply uncertainty. I now invite him for his talk on optimal recorder level and lot size decisions for an inventory system with defective items.
Hello from me.
Yes.
A moment to share my screen, please. Do you see my screen?
Yes, sir, it is visible. It is visible, sir.
Okay. Hello, my name is Yorgos Karakatsoulis, and today I will talk about optimal reorder level and lot size decisions for an inventory system with defective items. This is a joint work with my supervisor, Dr. Konstantinas Skouri. Here is the outline of the presentation. At first, there is an introduction in which the types of uncertainty will be mentioned, some of their causes, and some of their consequences. Then there is the model formulation, in which we will talk about the assumptions of the model and explain its mathematical formulation. Next, we will present numerical analysis and will close with some conclusions and future research suggestions. Firstly, supply uncertainty is a common phenomenon that firms must deal with, causing not only operational problems but also social problems. There are several types of supply uncertainty, among them random yield, the supply disruptions, and quality uncertainty. Random yield occurs when the lot received that does not necessarily match the lot order. Supply disruptions occur when the supply may not be available. This means that the placed order may not be received. And quality uncertainty occurs when the order received may contain imperfect quality items. Mathematically, in random yield, the received quantity equals to U times Q, where U is a number greater than 0. In supply disruption, it is equal to rho times Q, where rho is either 0 or 1. While in quality uncertainty, it is equal to Q, but this Q contains defective items. In our model, quality uncertainty is assumed, and it is formulated under the following assumptions. The planning horizon is infinite. The demand rate there is known, continuous, and constant. The lead time is 0. An order of size Q is placed once the inventory level becomes R. The time between two consecutive orders is defined as a cycle and it is of length T. Each lot of size Q may contain defective items, and let YQ the random number of non-defective items with the probability density function FQ. Each lot is subjected to 100% screening process at a finite rate x with x greater than the demand. The screening process is assumed to be error-free. The defective items are sold as a single batch at a lower price per unit at the end of the screening process. The number of defective items in a cycle is independent of the number of defective items in other cycles. The number of the perfect items is at least equal to the demand during the screening process, which means that this probability must be equal to 1. Two different cases about YQ are considered. In the first case, every item has a constant and known probability M to be defective, while in the second case, YQ equals to 1 minus P times Q, where P is a random variable with PDF f of P. It is independent of Q and with mean value equal to M. And although shortages are not allowed, during the screening period, non-planned shortages could occur, which are complete backlog at a cost B per unit time. In the literature, many researchers have studied systems with quality uncertainty and finite screening rate, initiating by Salameh and Jaber at 2000. The models differ, among others, in the planning horizon, which is finite or infinite, the screening process, which may be 100% or sampling, error-free or not, treating the screening rate as the decision variable or assuming that it is predetermined, and in the management of defective items, reject, sell in lower price, repair, etc. All these models have two common assumptions, except for one model. Firstly, they assume that the percentage of the defective items is independent of Q. However, if we assume that every percentage, every item has a constant probability to be defective, then YQ follows a binomial distribution with Q and 1 minus M. And as we can see in relation 3, the variance of P depends on Q. So this is the rationale of assumption 10. Also, based on assumption 9, they assume that this relation here ensures that no shortages will occur. However, 2006, Papachristos and Konstantaras, giving this example, showed that shortages could occur. We see here that this relation holds the inequality, the desired inequality holds. However, if we have 40 items, then we could receive up to 8 items and we need 2 days to screen them. If we find more than 4 in the first day, then unplanned shortages occur. Mada et al. At 2010 proposed the use of a reorder level equal to the whole demand during the screening process. Although this policy prevents shortages, we will show below that it will never be optimal. So, based on this, we have the assumption 11. The objective is the minimization of the total cost of the system per unit time, which is defined as the limit as t tends to infinity, the total cost of t divided by t. And we know from renewal reward theorem that this is equal to the expected total cost per cycle divided by the expected cycle length with probability 1. The total cost includes the fixed ordering cost, the holding cost, the backlogging cost, and the cost of the sale of defective items in lower price. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to formulate the expected shortages. If yq is the random number of non-defective items in a lot of size q, then at time t, x times t items have been screened. The question that arises here is how many of them are non-defective. So let y of t to be the random number of non-defective items that have been detected at time t. We need to know, since it is a random variable, we need to calculate its probability density function and let it be ft. If we calculate ft, then the expected shortages is given by this relation. Now, as we can see here, we need f of t. This property ensures that there is a time point TO such that the probability to occur unplanned shortages is 0 for T greater than TO. So if we set as a reorder level that satisfies the demand during this period until TO, shortages cannot occur. While if we set an R lower than that, then shortages perhaps occur and must be taken into account. So we will investigate these two cases. And now the expected shortages. Here we can see that the time is up to TO. So we need to find ft of y. And for this, the two cases where var of p depends or not on q will be considered. If we calculate the total cost, the ft, then the total cost when r is greater than dTO is given by this relation, which is the same as, which is similar as Madach et al. 2010 proposed, with the difference that here they didn't use r as decision variable, but they fixed it to be d times q divided by x, which is the demand during the screening process. Also, they assume that this quantity here and here, these quantities are independent of q, which is not always true. If r is lower than dTO, then we have to add the expected cost, an extra cost, which is due to the expected unplanned shortages. So we have the total cost, which is formulated from relation 5. And in case 1, where the var is depends on q, var of p, then we have the following proposition. We need to find ft. Let y of q, yq, a random variable which represents the number of non-defective items, and we assume that it follows a binomial distribution. Then if xt are the numbers of the items screened, we have that the probability mass function of y of t is given by relation 6. So we can see here that now the expected shortages, as we can see from here, this probability does not depend on q. It depends only on the screening rate. So the expected shortages are a function of r. And now we have this proposition that shows where the total cost attains its minimum. As we can see here, the reorder level is a newsboy styled, the optimal reorder level, and we can see that it is not always 0, as it has been assumed in all the previous papers. Now we go on the second case where var of p is independent of q. Now in this case, we can see that the probability mass function is given by this equation, where here we have the generalized binomial coefficients. We can see that it depends on q and not in a useful way, which means that the analysis here is could be more difficult. However, this proposition shows that this function is asymptotically independent of Q. So we will assume that it is independent of Q. And now TO is given by this relation. So now the total cost is given by these two functions, and we need to minimize this function in relation 13. Now, the second branch, TCB, when R tends to beta QZ, is equal to TCA when R is equal to beta QZ. This means that total cost is continuous. Also, the upper branch is increasing function in R. So it attains TC alpha attains its minimum for R equal to beta QZ. This means that in order to minimize the total cost, we only need to minimize this TCB, and at the worst case event, R will be equal to beta QZ. So this means that at the worst case event, R is lower than the already proposed by Madach et al. We can prevent shortages with a lower reorder level, since beta is lower than 1. Now we have the proposition that gives the minimum of the total cost. It's similar with the previous proposition. Now we have the numerical comparisons. Firstly, we will use an example to compare the worst case scenario when we set R equal to beta times Q times Z with the Madach et al.'s proposed policy. As we can see here from this table, we have a reduction in the total cost from 6 to 20%. Also, we reduce the average inventory per unit time from 5 to 32%. And you can see here that although we reduce the average inventory per unit time, our order quantity is greater. This means that we at the same time we increase the cycle length, so we can earn much we can save from the fixed ordering cost. Here we see the percent cost penalty. As when we have low percentage, we have a big percent cost penalty. Now we see the comparison of the optimal policy with the Madach and Jaber at 2008, where they assumed that R is always equal to 0. We can see here that the optimal R could be higher than 0. Now we will use a second example to compare the worst case scenario with the Madach et al.'s proposed policy. We can see here a cost reduction up to 32%, and the average inventory per unit time reduction is from 47% to 55%. And we used a simulation in order to estimate the shortage probability and the total cost. We used 5,000 samples and 100 cycles. We see here that in our model, okay, the reduction in the cost is insignificant. However, we have a high reduction in the probability of shortages. Here is 2.9, while here is 12.4. Also, we can see that the optimal R could be 0. Okay, there are parameters that the optimal R could be 0. And also, we used parametric bootstrap in order to, and we derived 95% confidence intervals for the total cost for optimal and suboptimal policies. We can see here that most of the confidence intervals overlap, which means that we can that a higher reorder level reduces the probability of shortages, but may does not may do not increase the total cost. Here we compare the two policies, one where the var of pay depends on Q, and in the other where is independent of Q. We can see that there are insignificant differences, and this is important in my opinion, because in the first case, the only information we have is that the average percentage is equal to m, and we assume that these items are independent of each other. In the second case, we need not only the average percentage, we need its distribution and the parameters of distribution. So we can result in a same result using less information. So in conclusion, var of pay was assumed to be dependent or independent of Q, and the reorder level was handled as a decision variable. A significant reduction both in the total cost of the system and in the average inventory per unit time using the worst case scenario policy instead of the policy proposed by Madah et al. Was observed. The non-zero reorder level may be optimal, leading both to cost and probability of shortages reduction. Hence, the model which takes into account the unplanned shortages outperforms the model proposed by Madah et Jaber. And the empirical estimation of the total cost shows that even suboptimal policies may lead to significant reduction of the probability of shortages with almost zero cost increase. Some future research suggestions, perhaps we could assume lot sales instead of complete backlogging or even partial backlogging, or we could allow reorder position to be lower than 0. This paper was published in Applied Mathematical Modeling with the title Optimal Reorder Level and Lot Size Decisions for Inventory System with Defective Items. Here are some other references, Madah and Jaber's. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very informative presentation. Now, you have some queries from the audience. Can you see over there in the chat box?
In the comments or in the private chat?
Comments.
In comments.
Yes, okay. How these costs are calculated? We use EOQ models. Yes, I didn't want to tire you, so I didn't show all the manipulation. EOQ model we use. Yes.
For calculation of cost, Mahima, you can refer to the paper. This paper is already published in Applied Mathematical Modeling. Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, so moving toward our next speaker, I would like to welcome our next eminent speaker, Professor S.R. Singh sir. Currently, he is professor and head of Department of Mathematics, CCS University, Meerut. He is having 25 years of teaching experience and 28 years of research experience. He has 198 research publications in his credit. Also, he is author of 11 books. He has successfully completed 3 UGC research projects as a principal investigator. Under his guidance, 13 students have awarded MPhil, 23 students have received their PhD degree, and currently 5 PhD research scholars are working. His area of interest are inventory modeling, environmental modeling, supply chain management, and reverse logistics. He has received Saraswati Award, which is the highest award by the Uttar Pradesh state government for outstanding contribution in the higher education in 2019. He is also recipient of Golden Jubilee Award by NASI, Excellent Teacher Award and 4-time Best Research Paper Award. He is President of Operational Research Society of India, Merit Chapter, and Life Member of Indian Science Congress, Indian Mathematical Society, Ramanujan Mathematical Society, and Operational Research Society of India. So now I request Professor Singh sir to deliver his talk on a sustainable inventory model for deteriorating item with manageable carbon emission. Over to you, Singh sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. M.B. Patel. Thanks a lot, Professor Neeta Shah, ma'am, conference chair. Thanks, Dr. Ravi Gaur, program chair, for inviting me for this a very relevant webinar on emerging trend in sustainable supply chain management. This is a very relevant topic. Good afternoon, Professor Baron, Professor Newman, Professor Georges. Yeah. So, schedule is before time. Here in my area, there is some network issue. So, I share my screen. In fact, I recorded my presentation and I will be there after this for questions. So, I am sharing. Inviting me. Myself, S.R. Singh. I am professor and head in the Department of Mathematics, CCS University Meerut. And the topic of today's talk is sustainable inventory model for deteriorating items with manageable carbon emissions. This is a very relevant topic, and the topic of webinar is very much technical and very much relevant to nowadays situation. So let us start. We know that there are climate change nowadays. We are talking more about climate change and carbon emissions. So the major problem the whole world nowadays is facing are environmental problems. The main cause which is responsible to harm the environment is continuously increasing carbon emissions from industries and transporting systems. Production companies releases very much amount of greenhouse gases. The main loss due to carbon emission is global warming, and most of the carbon emissions comes from transportation and inventory holding system. The government of many countries are nowadays trying to reduce the environmental loss due to greenhouse carbon emissions with the help of investment in green technology. So they are motivating towards the latest invention of green technology as it is the only solutions to control carbon emissions. So we measure carbon emissions through carbon footprint, and a carbon footprint is a measure of the impact of the activities have on the amount of carbon dioxide produced through the burning of fossil fuel, and it is expressed as a weight of carbon dioxide emissions produced in tons. So lesser carbon footprint, better is the environment, and more carbon footprint, it is increase greenhouse effect in the system. And the tools of our study are the mathematical tools, and we study through mathematical modeling. And as we know that mathematical model is the abstraction of reality. So mathematical model is described as conversion activities of a real problem in a mathematical form. So modeling process involved to formulate the real life situations or to convert the problem in mathematical explanations to find out a real or believable solution. Also, in alternative word, we can say that mathematical modeling is the art of translating problems from an application area into the mathematical formulations whose theoretical and numerical analysis provide insights, answers, and guidance, which is very much useful for the applications part. Again, sustainability is the key theme of the present talk. Sustainability is the study of interaction with the environment to prevent depletion of natural resources and allow for long-term environmental quality. The main aspect of going eco-friendly is about environmental sustainability, because nowadays global warming is the major threat to our planet. So we can save our planet by the use of good practices of sustainability. Sustainable supply chain management involves integrating environmentally and financially viable practices into the complete supply chain cycles. You know that every supply chain system has several parts. So if we apply uh, on in sustainability in each and every part, they can then only we can achieve the required objectives. So when I was preparing for this talk, then by curiosity, I studied some data near to me in my city, and I found that the data is from 2nd May to 3rd June about sulfur dioxide. This is also a greenhouse gas. So larger source of sulfur dioxide emissions are electricity generations, industrial boilers, and other industrial processes such as refining, metal processing, and most importantly, diesel engines are major source, including old buses, trucks, locomotive, and off-road diesel equipments like diesel engine and other machines. So I found that it's very dangerous level, and you can see that good level is between 0 to 0.1 ppm parts per millions, and moderate is between 0.1 to 0.2, and unhealthy between 1 to 3, and dangerous is more than 5. And in my area, continuously level is almost more than 20. So you can imagine that we are living in a gas chamber like, and there are some discontinuity in the graph because of lockdown and other. This data is given by the government website. I've taken from the government website. Next, I observe about the ozone level near to me in my city, and I found that ozone level is moderate between 51 to 100 and good for 0 to 50. So ozone level is so near to me, but in some times you can see that between 28 May to 3rd June, ozone level is also crossed the limit, and it is become in unhealthy level. And ozone happens when pollutants emitted by cars, power plant, industrial boilers, refineries, chemical plants, and other sources chemically react in the presence of sunlight. Ozone is most likely to reach unhealthy levels on hot sunny days in urban environment. Like these days, these are hot sunny days in northern part of India, but in winters it can also rise sometime. Then I come to the deterioration, which is the another keyword of this presentation. Deterioration is an important part. Inventory modelers studied a lot about this concept, and every system has to handle it carefully. Most of the agriculture and food items have to go through deteriorations. In this regard, we can prevent deterioration, we can reduce deteriorations with the help of preservation technologies. So manager always invest in preservation technologies for items having a short life cycle. Short life cycles product needs to be a customized preservation technologies for individual product. So to establish a sustainable inventory model, sustainable inventory system or sustainable supply chain system, investment in both preservation technologies and as well as in green technologies is essential. About some kind of literature review and previous researchers works in this area, deterioration, we know that in 1963, first time Ghare and Skidder introduced the concept of deterioration. Thereafter, after 10 years, Covert and Phillips um, take, taken a better rate for deteriorations. They use Babel distribution functions. Professor C.K. Jaggi, he is an important contributor in the rate of deteriorations. Professor Neeta Shah, Professor Baron, and several others contribute. I can see in this webinar, a lot of leading researchers are there in inventory modeling. So all of them contribute a lot in the area of deteriorations. Professor Shiv Shankar Sada, Sujit Le, Professor Bhunia, and Professor Baron, Professor Jaggi, all of them contribute a lot in the area of deteriorations. You can see in third reference, Professor Bhunia, Professor Mehdi, Professor Iskori, Professor S.K. Goel, Professor B.C. Giri, myself also contribute a little bit, and B.C. Giri, Chan et al., and every time. Now there is rare some model which where concept deterioration is not used. So in case of deteriorations, inventory modeling advanced a lot, and several good research papers are also there. Now come to the preservation technologies. In many inventory systems, the deterioration in product is commonly observed, resulting in extreme damage in terms of quality as well as quantity of the items. Various steps have been taken to reduce the deterioration effect. This is to reduce the deterioration effect is called preservation technologies. So preservation technology investment is a preferred way to reduce the deterioration rate. So in this direction also, a few researchers work significantly. Professor Jubair, Professor Dai, Professor Hassis and Dai, later also the same authors, Chung and Dai, even Professor Baron, Professor Jaggi, Professor Neeta Shah. Again, they are the important signature in the area of inventory modeling. And then advanced payment schemes and literature review. Advanced payment is an alternative payment policy for suppliers. We use this concept in the study presented. When a retailer places an order for the product, the supplier demands some money in advance. This is a practical situation. Next, the supplier provides some price discount or advance payment for this, particularly for seasonal product or flammable deteriorating item. The seller usually requests buyer to prepay fractions of the cost as a good faith deposit. In return, the buyer get an on-time delivery guarantee, and also if you prepay the payment, then you can have a price discount also. In this direction, Professor Tang presented advanced payment and product expiration date model, and Les Giri introduced a concept of partial upstream and partial downstream. Then Banerjee in 2008 18, huge partial advancement payment scheme. Then Lee also used trade credit policies, advance payments, Chang et al. In 2019 also introduced advance payment schemes. And again, I will name the persons who are the speakers in this webinars: Professor Baron, Professor Jaggi, Professor Neeta Shah, Professor Bhunia, Professor Mehdi. They also important contribute in these schemes, particularly trade credit policies. Professor Jaggi studied a lot and significant work has been done. Green technology. Basically, green technology is a common word, and green technology is a huge word. It has huge uh, meaning. So it's an umbrella that describes the use of technologies and science to create products that are more environmentally friendly. Examples of green technology includes the technology infrastructure used to recycle waste. This is important. Recycle waste, uh, purify waters, create clean energy, and conserve natural resources. This is the purpose of green technology, and in this direction also several authors were Professor Waheb, Professor Vishnu Sarkar, Balmain and Salim, Professor Datta, and others also consider green technology, concept of green technology in sustainable supply chain inventory systems. Again, this is a tabular form of literature review, and about this paper, as you can see that we have division between division of the work among stock dependent demand, price dependent demand, deterioration, carbon emission, preservation technology investment, advanced payment scheme, time varying holding cost, inflation, green technology investment. And you can see Professor Neeta Shah contributed in 2014 a paper which has stock and selling price dependent demand, deterioration she also consider, and preservation technology. In 7 years before, she used this concept, preservation technology and inflation also. Then several other authors, and at the end, you can see that this paper consider stock dependent demand as well as selling price dependent demand. Rate of penetration is taken into considerations. Carbon emission, to control carbon emission practices is applied in this study. And preservation technology investment is also there. Advanced payment scheme we also use. And time varying holding cost is also used. Effect of inflation is taken into considerations. And concept of green technology is also a part of this study. And this study uh, is a major work of one of my scholar, Mr. Archit Jain. He's JRF and he's working in this paper. We are jointly working in this paper. And we found some research gap. Some studies considered the preservation technology and green technology investment that showed the low amount of carbon emissions and optimize their functions. Taking all this in considerations, the subsequent research questions derives how a sustainable economic order quantity model composed within the consideration of preservation technology investment, green technology investment, inflation, effect of inflation, and advanced payment scheme, because in this pandemic situation, this concept is applied in many cases. This is the problem definition. To fill the gap, the proposed study developed a sustainable economic order quantity model, which invests in both preservation technology and green technology simultaneously. So we obtained minimum cost to reduce the carbon emissions emitting from the vehicles. This research is aimed to develop a model for retailer that can minimize the cost. Cost minimization technique is applied here with less environmental loss. This study also considered the payment problems occurring in COVID-19 situations. A supplier offer an advance payment policy to its retailer. That retailer can pay the full amount in multiple installment, as most of the persons could not hold a huge amount of money in this pandemic to pay full payment in a single installment. This is a realistic concept. This is applied in this study. And inflation also, effect of inflation is also taken into considerations for this study. This one is the research methodology you can see. First of all, as in mathematical modeling, we define model assumptions, then explain physical situations and frame mathematical formulations. then divide the model into two subcases. In first case, we consider only preservation technology, and in second case, we consider preservation technology as well as green technologies. Then thereafter, we solve both models individually, and after solution of the model, we investigate, we make numerical experimentation or validations, and there in the paper we are planning to present a particular study uh, numerically, and then discussion about sensitivity, convexity, conclusion, managerial implications. They are part of this study. So the model assumptions is that first assumptions, the model invests in preservation technology to control the rate of deterioration. For preservation technologies investment, the function which is used given here, y tau is equal to y naught e raised to the power minus u tau, which satisfied the condition that first partial derivative is less than 0 and second order partial derivative is greater than 0, and one initial condition, and where u is the sensitivity parameter of the investment whose value is between 0 and 1. Now, this is a established rate which is used by the several researchers. Effect of inflation, rate of inflation is denoted by small r, and the demand rate is selling price as well as stock level dependent, because stock display is also an important area. So demand rate is stock as well as selling price dependent. Instant deterioration arises for all the items we taken. In the case of advance payment, the leading time is constant. Otherwise, the lead time assumed in the port model is close to 0 for the case of no advance payment. And holding cost is also taken as variable. It's a linear function of time. So again, we can see pictorially the model setup. You know that in left hand side we have a manufacturer, and there is a advance payment scheme between manufacturer and retailers, and inventory is supplied through manufacturer to retailers. So there is carbon emissions due to in transportation system. Then retailer, on the part of retailer, preservation technology and green technology investment are applied, and also effect of inflation is taken into consideration. So this is a pictorial representation of the model. And we have two cases. Case one, when we consider preservation technologies. So deterioration is a major task to handle in the current inventory system. We applied preservation technology system in this model, and the case two, when we consider both preservation technologies as well as green technologies. So in green technology, for the green technology, we use this term f is equal to gamma 1 minus exponential psi into g, where gamma represent maximum reduced amount of carbon emission when green technology invested, and psi the efficiency of green technology in declining emissions, and g is the discrete quantity of investment in green technology. And this study, this rate was given by in 2015 by Professor Noor. So we use this rate here, and this one is a graphical representation of the inventory control situations. You can see that here, first one is show deterioration with preservation technologies, and second one deterioration without preservation technology. So preservation technology reduce the rate of deterioration, we can see. And in this side, we have taken several expressions which are obtained mathematically, and so advanced payment schemes, notations, and the cycle time. So the associated differential equations of the stock level is given by the rate of change of first order differential equation, which is influenced by the rate of deterioration and demand. with initial conditions, and we solved these equations and obtained the various cost component. Ordering cost, graduation technology investment cost, mathematically, total purchase cost, this is also obtained mathematically. The iteration cost per cycle, we also calculate this, and variable holding cost then, and finally green technology cost. And we can again see that there is inventory movement of um, from supplier to retailer to consumers. So in this system, stock level Q is delivered by the suppliers after getting the full amount of payment and then transported to the consumer from the retailer. The supplier transport all the stocks to the retailer by the use of trucks. The distance add up to the reverse process because the trucks will return back. Also, so distance to DS is added. The truck generate carbon emissions, which is emergent on the purchased stocks of the vehicle, payload, and extra carbon emission is also added after the supplier transports stock to the retailer. The total vehicle fuel consumption is multiplied into the variable transportation cost. That's the process how we calculate different costs. And this is the transportation cost without green technology investment per cycle. And in this, we can see that this one is supplier part and that one is a retailer part. This is the transportation cost. And when we invest in green technology, then we obtain different transportation cost, which is given by this, and green investment part is shown by this particular term. Then we obtained cyclic capital cost. This is given by mathematically. This term, we solve this using mathematical tools and techniques. Then total cost for case one. When only preservation technology investment is done, then this cost is given by this particular amount, TC1. We can see the component holding cost, iteration cost, transportation cost, and cyclic capital cost. And this is total case for two when preservation technology as well as green technology investment are done. So after obtaining total cost, we obtained some theoretical results also. And first theorem is for every fixed T, TC1 shows its convexity in tau, and there exists a unique solution. So we prove this theorem by the using established mathematical technique given the reference. So yeah, this is solved by the theorem using theorem 3.29 and 3.2.10 in Cambany and Martin 2009. This is a book and reference is given here. And through this, we show that solution exists uniquely, and also it is pseudo-convex function. Then theorem 2, for every fixed t, in first we fix t, and in second theorem we fix the tau, because tc1 is a function of two variables. So we can also develop a theorem in this case also. So this is very much similar, proof is very much similar to the theorem first. And then one more theorem, the total cost function of case 1 is less beneficial than case 2. So case 1 was then when only preservation technology investment was done, and case 2 was when preservation technology as well as green technology investment was there. So in this theorem, we theoretically proven that the second case, when both the investment are there, is more beneficial, which motivate the decision makers to investment in preservation technology as well as green technology. And we inventory modelers knows that we need to find out the convexity in three-dimensional graph and two-dimensional. So proper convexity of total cost function is obtained. Likewise, that was for case one when only preservation technology is applied, and when preservation technology and green technologies are there, then we obtained convexity of total cost function in 2D and 3D. You can see, and this is also a data for practical cases for case one. Case one when preservation technology is there. So we find out total cost function when preservation technology investment is applied. This is the cost. Without PT, cost is more. No advance payment. This is the cost. Full advance payment. They are marginally equal. So we can see that we can apply either policies. And this is for the case two. We can see that when projection technology and green technology investment, then cost is lesser in comparison to when without projection technology investment was done. Likewise, here is the reference when no advance payment, then this is the cost. When full advance payment, then this one is the cost. So these are the informations for the managers to apply to take decisions effectively. These are the observations. The cost in the first case of 2 is 3.43 less than of case 1. So this is the percentage wise variations of the result, and these informations are very much effective and useful for decision makers to make their decisions. So these are the important observations. Then we applied sensitivity, and in sensitivity we have taken range between a range of 20%, minus 20% up to minus 20% and up to plus 20% of the existing decision parameters, and we found the model stables, and also several important observations are there. So due to time shortage, I will not explain all in details. So these are the observations of sensitivity analysis, which is being done in details. And also some pictorial view of sensitivity of the data, which we obtained in earlier slide. That data is shown in pictorial representation. We can have an overview of this data without projection technology, with projection, and green technology with projection technology. So what is the effect when minus 20%, 10%, 10%? So we can use this data for decisions. The same thing, pictorial view of sensitivity analysis of holding cost parameter and other parameter, carbon emission cost and other costs we can obtain. So this is the model. The proposed discussed model is developed about retailers' profit. The main highlight of this paper can be availed into firms to reduce the total cost with less investment. Most of the retailer can apply this model as the proposed model deals with a more realistic conditions, inflations. This help greenhouse firms to control the carbon emissions by investing in the proposed green technology. A lot of numerical informations are there to which they can customize, or they can get an overview for their some particular problems, and advanced payment scheme that is also applied, and mathematical results theoretically as well as numerically insightness are also provided in this study. So a lot of information from sensitivity and numerical experimentation we can get, and I think I discussed the conclusion part earlier in the detail in the model. So the future scope present study can be further extendable to 2 items or multi-item inventory system, different type of trade credit policies, partial backlogging, effect of shortages, and Also, fuzzy environment and probabilistic version of the model is also a future scope of the work. These are all are the references. So thank you everyone. And again, thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my present work with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Singraj,
Thanks a lot,
for,
ma'am.
uh, for
I,
covering almost everything. Green
I think,
technology,
yeah.
preservation technology, advance payment. Now, only thing you left from me is trade credit.
Yeah, ma'am. It's your specialized area, and I can expect a good paper from you. We all are following you in this
No, no,
direction.
no. Now I
Yeah,
will follow yours. Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you for.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. I found that it was slow and the voice quality was not up to the mark, but there were some issues regarding network. So I take a safer side to record the presentation, although I'm
No
presenting.
problem. No problem.
Thank you,
It
ma'am.
was audible. It was audible. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Please stop share this admin if you can. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Proceeding towards another eminent speaker of the day, I would like to introduce Professor Peruvemba Sundaram Ravi. Professor P.S. Ravi is an associate professor in operations and decision science at the Lazaridis School of Business and Economics, Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada. Professor Ravi is also the Maritime Ontario Director of the Centre for Supply Chain Management at the Lazaridis School. He has completed his BTech from IIT Delhi, a PGDM from IIM Kolkata. Further, he has done MS in Operation Research from the University of Rochester and PhD in Operations Management from Washington University in St. Louis. Professor Ravi has made presentations at numerous conferences and has published articles in various academic journals including IIE, Transactions, Journals of Operation Research Society, Journal of Scheduling and Information Proceeding Letters. I now request Professor Ravi to deliver his talk on globalization and sustainable supply chain. Sir, now mic is yours.
Yes, thank you, Ektaji. I'll just try to.
You're welcome, sir.
Just, so I hope you can see the slides.
No, sir. No,
You
Professor.
cannot. You cannot.
Now,
Okay.
now it is coming. Now it is coming.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. So I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Shah and all the other organizers for inviting me to this webinar and for giving me the opportunity to also attend all of these other very interesting talks. My presentation is a little different from some of the others here. So this is not a presentation that focuses on mathematical modeling. It's more a conceptual presentation. I'll discuss some issues relating to sustainable supply chains. So the title of this talk is Globalization and Sustainable Supply Chains. And I'll talk about...
Professor Ravi, can you make it slideshow?
Sure, I'll try again. Just a minute.
No, from the beginning, first one. Very first.
Sure. Just a second.
And on the top, you can say from the beginning PowerPoint. So
right. Is this Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Is the slideshow? Okay, thank
It
you.
has not gone to PowerPoint.
Oh, it has not gone?
No, PowerPoint is not coming up. Slides are visible,
Okay,
but full slideshow is not there.
is not there?
So,
Okay, let me
so
just
if you on the left side,
right,
on the left,
right. Let me just. So I. So for me, it is
yeah, you can start that. Click on it.
sure. So is it visible now?
It will take few seconds.
Right.
At present, no.
Okay. Okay.
But you can continue. No problem.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So the title of this talk is Globalization and Sustainable Supply Chains. And as I mentioned, this is not a mathematical modeling paper kind of presentation. It's a discussion of some issues and some concepts related to sustainable supply chains. So essentially, I'll be talking about the relationship between three concepts: the idea of supply chain management, the concept of globalization, and the concept of sustainability. Now, clearly, the term supply chain management, the textbook definition of it is simply that it is the management of essentially raw materials, components, a work in process, finished goods, funds, and information. The management of all of these flows from the original source of raw materials to the final destination, which is the consumer.
Professor
So,
Ravi, it is still
yes,
first slide. I think
still
you
first.
are on the third slide, but on screen it is first slide.
Okay, let's see. Let me try this. Okay, let's just give me a minute. So is it now visible, the second slide?
No.
Okay, just let's try this again.
Professor Ravi, go
All right.
mechanically slide wise.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll do
now
that.
it is second slide.
Okay, so, okay, sure. Okay. So is this, now this is not in the slideshow setting, but is it visible?
No problem, don't worry.
Sure,
This
okay.
is second slide.
Right, this is the second slide. So I'll be talking about the relationship between three central concepts, that is supply chain management, the phenomenon of globalization, and the concept of sustainability. Now, the textbook definition of supply chain management is simply that it's the management of various flows, the flow of raw materials, the flow of components, the flow of work in process, and the flow of the finished product, and also the flow of funds and information along the supply chain, that is from the original source of raw materials to the final destination, which is the consumer. And generally speaking, the SCM approach, or the SCM, the supply chain management philosophy, requires firms to focus on the maximization of some objectives, such as profits, for the entire supply chain. Now, the traditional approach, which preceded SCM, the old approach, was a firm-specific approach, which tended to focus on the optimization of firm-specific objectives, such as the profits of the firm, or even functional area objectives, such as sales revenues, or in some cases, just the number of units sold. Now, clearly, the traditional approach involved solving a sub-problem or trying to find the optimal solution to a sub-problem. So clearly that led to a suboptimal solution for the supply chain as a whole. And it led to lower aggregate profits for the supply chain than the supply chain management approach. So since the 80s and 90s in particular, the focus on the supply chain approach is essentially due to the fact that it can potentially lead to increased profits for the entire supply chain and hence for every player within the supply chain. So every part of the supply chain can potentially benefit from uh, from a coordinated management of the supply chain. In recent years, we've also seen a lot of talk about globalization, and we've observed the phenomenon of globalization. And broadly speaking, globalization is essentially everything that is involved in the flow of ideas, the flow of people, the flow of materials, the flow of finished goods, and the flow of capital across national boundaries. So all the processes involved in these flows, that's really what globalization is about. Now, clearly, one can see that globalization is, in some sense, at an abstract level, consistent with the supply chain management approach. So, supply chain management seeks to, in a sense, optimize across firm boundaries by looking at the entire supply chain, whereas globalization, in a manner of speaking, seeks to optimize across national boundaries. So, globalization is a natural extension, and global SCM would simply mean that you apply the SCM approach, but you apply it to large global supply chains. You don't restrict yourselves to having, let's say, a raw material supplier, a manufacturer, a wholesaler, and a retailer in one country. You let these supply chains be cross national boundaries in a sense. And as we've observed, globalized supply chains have become increasingly common over the last several decades. And this is just one example. There are many other examples. So this is taken from an article in IJPR by Liu, Leet, Moiser, Megix, and Kasturi Ratne. So these are just the tier one or the immediate suppliers for a laptop computer. So this is not a complete list of the suppliers. It's just the suppliers who supply directly to the manufacturer. So in this particular instance, as you can see, the tier one suppliers are located in a variety of countries, China, the Philippines, and Malaysia, and many others. So it's a very large number of suppliers located in many parts of the world. And at this point, we're only looking at the tier one suppliers. If you look at the entire supply chain or the supply network, clearly you'd end up with an even larger number of countries. So this is just one example of the extent to which supply networks have become globalized. So clearly, this is a phenomenon that has become very significant in the last few years. Now, another concept that's attracted a lot of attention in the last few decades, and that is also sort of the focus of this webinar, is the notion of sustainability. And one of the earliest scholars to talk about it, not necessarily from a supply chain management perspective, but from a development perspective, was the economist René Passé, who essentially suggested that sustainable development had an economic dimension, an environmental dimension, and a social dimension. And in later years, many scholars have suggested that you also need a cultural dimension to be as the fourth dimension of sustainable development. Now, within the fields of operations management and supply chain management, the greatest focus has been on the environmental dimension of sustainability. And in the broader, let's say, the economics literature and the sustainable development literature, there's been talk of some of the other dimensions too. So here we have three concepts. We have the concept of sustainability, we have the supply chain management philosophy, and we also have the phenomenon of globalization. So I'll just talk briefly about the extent to which, in a sense, these interact. So as we've seen, globalization is, in a sense, something that fits in very well with the supply chain management philosophy. Instead of optimizing within the boundaries of a country, you're optimizing across the world. So instead of just looking at the pool of potential suppliers and the pool of customers within, and the pool of, say, manufacturing facilities within one country, you're looking at it across the world. So it's a very natural extension of sort of domestic supply chain management. Now, as I mentioned, in the context of operations and supply chain, the focus has been to a significant extent specifically on the environmental dimension. And there are several key questions relating to the environmental dimension of sustainability that have been raised by scholars. So this list is taken from an article by Linton, Klassen, and Jayaraman in the Journal of Operations Management. And these are just very broad questions. So what resources will future generations require? At what levels can pollutants be released? To what extent will new sources of depletable resources be identified in the future? Can renewable resources be exploited? Per capita income across the world? To what extent can market forces drive sustainability? So can you leave it to the market, or do you need government intervention? Do lifestyles need to change from the current consumption-oriented lifestyle? And if so, how? What sort of policies are needed in order to achieve sustainability? So these were some key questions identified by these scholars. And these have sort of informed research in various ways. These have had an impact on research in both in supply chain management and in some other fields. Now, if one looks at the link between sustainability and supply chain management, it's again, one can see that it is possible, in a sense, to incorporate sustainability into supply chain thinking and modeling. So it's not these are not inconsistent concepts. So some of the ways in which these can be done are through the use of closed loop supply chains and reverse logistics. So before the emergence of sustainable supply chain management, when we were looking at essentially unidirectional supply chains from the raw material supplier down to the consumer, essentially some of that modeling, some of that thinking can now be applied to closed loop supply chains, where you would, where, as discussed by some of the previous speakers, you would set up reverse supply chains. So you would essentially have flows in both directions, both from the original source of raw materials to the destination, and back. You would sort of pick up used products from the consumer and have them sent back for reusing some of the components. So that's clearly one way in which sustainability can be brought into supply chain thinking. And another way in which sustainability is consistent with traditional supply chain thinking and also actually traditional operations management thinking is the notion of efficiency. So even before supply chain management emerged as an area, there was some focus on efficiency, on maximizing yield, minimizing defects. So just the notion of material efficiency, so minimizing scrap and waste, fuel efficiency, and energy efficiency. All of these are fairly traditional operations management concepts. There is literature on those, and they're also consistent with the supply chain management philosophy. They're also consistent with sustainability, with the notion of sustainability. So the notion of efficiency and the notion of recovery. So, for instance, energy recovery. So if you have, let's say, hot water leaving your facility, a chemical plant, you might be able to recover some of the heat from that, and similar concepts. So that's again the notion of efficiency and recovery. These are old operations management concepts, but they're also very sustainability related. And the third way is by using, in a sense, appropriate cost values, or by accounting for costs appropriately. So traditionally, costs don't account for negative externalities. So if a factory uses up energy, the cost accounting system would account for the actual price paid for the energy, but not necessarily for the emissions associated with the energy or the damage that the process of producing that energy, of generating that energy, causes to the environment. So it is possible to try to factor those costs in, and so into energy costs, similarly into disposal costs, rather than just the market price for disposal. If one factors in Also, the damage to the environment caused by disposal, that would again be one way of using a more accurate cost number, and also the cost of emissions. So essentially, if one uses appropriate cost values that factor in not just the market price associated with, say, energy and disposal and emissions and the like, but also the external effects, the externalities associated with all of these. That's another way in which you can essentially use mainstream operations and supply chain models and still bring in the notion of sustainability into them. And there are many classic operations and supply chain concepts that were not developed in the context of sustainability, but that are consistent in some sense, or don't run counter to the notion of sustainability. So the concept of lean, in a sense, that includes typically the avoidance of wastage and overproduction, the avoidance of of excess inventory and the like. And in some sense, this is fairly consistent with the notion of sustainability. So, typically with lean operations, you're less likely to have wastage, you're less likely to overproduce, and that can also be, in many cases, good for the environment. Also, operations management concepts like the concept of component commonality, the concept of delayed differentiation. So, in component commonality, we design products in such a way that there's a common basket of components or a common set of components that are combined, say, in different ways to produce different finished products. So this makes product design easier, but it also results in lower levels of inventory in the supply chain. It results in greater responsiveness to consumers, and this is also sort of consistent with sustainability because it's a leaner and more efficient way of producing products. So if you have, let's say, products which have no shared components, you would typically require much higher levels of inventory in the supply chain, so that can be shown fairly easily. So you would require much higher levels of inventory. You would end up clearly with more unsold goods and more disposal of those unsold goods, and that would again be that would clearly not be very good from the sustainability point of view. Similarly, the concept of delayed differentiation, which basically means that you produce something like a generic version of a product, and you then add on a few features at the last few stages based on customer preferences. Again, this leads to lower levels of inventory, less wastage, and it again is clearly consistent with the concept of sustainability. So many of these ideas were not developed for sustainability, but they're consistent with the notion of sustainability. And broadly speaking, one could say that sustainability can be, in a sense, incorporated clearly into supply chain management and and more broadly into operations management. So these are not completely inconsistent concepts. Now, when you bring in all of these three concepts, that is globalization, sustainability, and the supply chain management philosophy, there's a certain tension that arises. There's a certain degree of inconsistency. So if one looks at the effect of globalization, clearly it's resulted in very long supply chains and very geographically dispersed supply networks. So you have these supply chains that covered large parts of the world. You have long transportation lanes. You have facilities scattered all over the world. So these supply chains are typically characterized by large volumes of raw materials, semi-finished goods, and finished goods being transported over long distances. And in many cases, these supply chains are really not environmentally sustainable. So if you factor in the cost of the fuel used to transport these goods, also the fact that because of these long lead times, you sometimes have significant levels of inventory in various stages of the supply chain. In an overall sense, they're efficient from the supply chain point of view because they're optimizing across the world in a sense, as I mentioned. But from the point of view of sustainability, they are not really, they're not ideal. They're not environmentally sustainable. And if one looks at reverse supply chains, used products essentially flow from the customer to the manufacturer and subsequently to the suppliers of components, raw materials. And the idea again being that rather than disposing of the finished these components or just throwing them away, you can reuse them, and that would be good for the environment in various ways. You would need smaller amounts of fresh components. You wouldn't have to dispose of it in a manner that damages the environment. Now, clearly, the benefits of setting up a reverse supply chain are largely lost if the reverse supply chain is very long. So if you have a supply chain which runs, say, hypothetically from China to North America, and if you have a reverse supply chain which involves sending some of those components back to the manufacturer, it would in a sense, really defeat the purpose of setting up the reverse supply chain, because the environmental damage caused by the length of that chain would largely cancel out the benefits of that. So clearly, in many different ways, increased globalization isn't always consistent with the notion of sustainability. Conversely, it's also true that measures that countries have taken to promote sustainability have sometimes served as barriers to trade and impediments to globalization. So any even environmental standards or labor standards and the like can sometimes reduce the extent of globalization. So there is, in some sense, some tension between these concepts. And what I'll now talk about briefly is possible ways to reconcile all of these different concepts. So one way would simply be something that I referred to in one of the previous slides. So by using appropriate cost numbers or cost parameters, it might be possible to essentially incorporate environmental sustainability into existing models of globalized supply chains. So one way to do this might be to carefully examine all cost figures and to split those into components that relate directly to energy consumption and components that do not relate directly to energy consumption. So for instance, the variable production cost per unit in a manufacturing facility might include, so in general, it might include, let's say, a labor cost per unit plus some energy cost per unit plus some raw material cost per unit. And clearly, the energy costs relate directly to energy consumption. The labor cost doesn't. So we can maybe treat these differently. The raw material cost, on the other hand, the price paid for raw materials could include the price that's paid at the supplier's facility plus the transportation cost. And again, the transportation cost is something that's energy intensive, that relates to energy consumption. And one simple way to continue to use some of the classic supply chain management models and the operations management models that exist would be to maybe take some of these energy consumption related cost components, scale them up by a certain factor that would be larger than one, and the size of the factor would then be an indicator of the value placed in sustainability. So that number can be maybe increased with the passage of time, and the larger that number, the greater the incentive to reduce energy consumption, the greater the incentive to construct a sustainable supply chain. And so this can be applied to any to most existing models of globalized supply chains. It would presumably lead to a different design of the supply chain network. It would lead to a different configuration of facilities and transportation lanes. So this is one way to do it. And similarly, one could say that the cost of recycled materials and components could be scaled down by a factor less than one. So if it costs you, let's say, the process of recovering recovering the finished product from the final consumer, of getting it returned and then having it sent up the supply chain to the manufacturing facility, if all of that adds up to a cost of, let's say, 50 rupees a unit, one could apply a factor of, say, 0.8 and bring it down to 40 rupees, and thereby essentially provide an incentive for an increased use of recycled materials and components. So this may be just one sort of a way of tinkering with the cost parameters so that the existing literature and models can continue to be applied, but with a sustainability element being brought into those global supply chain models. And other ways to do this might be to use policy measures. So there are various measures that have been used. So for instance, one way to bring in sustainability is by mandating the use of green suppliers and green modes of transport. So one would then need to essentially have some way of checking whether the supplier and the shipper are in fact green or environmentally friendly. So one would need auditing mechanisms and certification mechanisms. So there are well-established standards such as the ISO 14000 family of standards. And there are firms that specialize in certifying other firms. So if a supply chain is made up almost entirely of ISO 14001 certified firms, presumably that supply chain would be more sustainable than a supply chain made up of firms that don't have the certification. And so this is one way for a firm to construct a globalized supply chain while still meeting the requirement of environmental sustainability. Now, from the point of view of the firms that are the suppliers that are being told to meet these standards, the increased sales and exports that result from these standards could serve to encourage firms to adopt these standards and could also partly cover the costs associated with meeting these standards. So the idea here is that a firm invests some money and makes an effort to meet these standards, that would then make it possible for it to increase its exports, sell to certain large customers overseas, and that would then, in a sense, cover the costs of meeting these standards. And if governments and industry associations and chambers of commerce, if they promote the adoption of such standards, those sorts of initiatives would then be examples of globalization promoting sustainability. So if a government were to encourage firms to in a sense, adopt these standards, you would have all of these objectives being met. You could have supply chains that are globalized but are still sustainable. And there are other ways that have been used to incorporate environmental sustainability into globalized supply chains. One approach is to try to coordinate policies across countries or even across states or provinces within countries. So one way to do that is by having global treaties. And our global treaties tend to set broad long-term targets or medium-term targets. But there are also more specific ways to coordinate policies. So one good example is the state of California in the US and Quebec in Canada. So both of these states had adopted essentially what's called a cap and trade system. So in a cap and trade system, you have a regulatory body that sets a cap on annual greenhouse gas emissions. So this would be in the form of a certain number of allowances that are given to companies. So it essentially tells a company that you can release a certain amount of greenhouse gas and no more. So each company would have a cap, each industry sector would have a cap. Companies would typically be given a certain amount of free permits, in a sense, some free pollution, so to speak, or some free emissions, and they would then they can buy more in a government auction. Now the cap gets reduced over time, so companies have an incentive to invest in the reduction of greenhouse gases over time. Now companies which use up all of their allowances will need to buy more from companies that have unused allowances. So companies that are better at managing emissions, are better at reducing emissions, can then sell their unused allowances to companies that aren't so good at managing their emissions. Now, California in the US and Quebec in Canada had set up very similar systems with similar parameters and similar limits. And they essentially, in about 2014, they established a link. They sort of partially merged the systems. So they were then able to jointly auction greenhouse gas allowances. And the advantage here is that if you're a firm in California, it becomes easier to do business in Quebec. If you're a firm in Quebec, it becomes easier to do business in California. So one can clearly see that this is an example of globalization and sustainability sort of going hand in hand. So this can be extended in other areas too. So for instance, clearly, say if hypothetically a state in India and a state in some other country were to coordinate the policies, or if two large countries were to coordinate the policies, it would open up the other country as a market in a sense. So you would have greater globalization, and you'd also have a greater degree of sustainability. Now, it's also been suggested that for countries that have taxes on carbon emissions, those taxes can be coordinated, and that would again lead to both sustainability and a certain degree and more globalization. So one way to do that is by having a minimum carbon emission tax. So if you have a minimum carbon emission tax, you wouldn't have an incentive for companies to move to countries which don't have these taxes. So essentially, you would achieve sustainability, and you would still have a high degree of globalization. Now, as I mentioned, environmental sustainability has probably been the biggest focus area within supply chain management. But some of the ideas that I mentioned can also be extended to social sustainability. So one way to promote social sustainability in a global supply chain is to, just as in the case of environmental sustainability, one can require suppliers to be socially responsible. So there exist standards for that, ISO 26,000 and ISO 45,000. So if we set up a supply chain made up of suppliers that meet these standards, again, we would essentially have achieved the objective of social sustainability while still achieving globalization by having a global supply chain. And in many cases, firms, instead of using these standards, actually set up their own auditing and control mechanisms. So, for instance, Apple has done that, and many others have done that with some degree of success. Now, from the point of view of the suppliers, if they're able to meet these standards, they can then become a part of these global supply chains, and they can, in some cases, command a premium price, or they might be able to sell to certain large overseas customers. So the cost of, say, for instance, the cost of investing in safety, in safer facilities, the cost of investing in better conditions in the workplace, and the like, that, in a sense, would lead to a benefit in terms of being able to charge a higher price and being able to sell to certain large customers. So again, here, both globalization and sustainability are being sort of achieved in a sense. And the governments and industry associations and chambers of commerce can launch initiatives to promote such standards, and that would again be something that leads both to greater globalization and greater sustainability. And another way to achieve, again, sustainability and globalization is in the area of agriculture through the use of fair trade and agricultural cooperatives. So the idea behind fair trade is that in some countries, products are labeled fair trade products, which essentially means that the supply chain that was used to procure those products, such as, say, coffee, consists of is a supply chain that treats all the members of the supply chain well. So the farmers, for instance, get a high price for their produce, and there is no exploitation in the supply chain. So that's again a way to construct global supply chains which are also sustainable, which are also socially sustainable, and this can also be linked to the concept of agricultural cooperatives. So this has been done in many countries. So there's a very large cooperative movement in India, and New Zealand is one example of a country that has done a very good job of using agricultural cooperatives to essentially lead to achieve greater sustainability and to be, in a sense, simultaneously more successful in global markets. So there are large cooperatives for kiwi fruit and for dairy products in New Zealand, and this has led to both to sustainable practices. So, for instance, those cooperatives don't procure seeds from major multinational firms. They sort of develop them locally. So it's a more sustainable practice, but it's also something that's led them to be part of major global supply chains. So there's one cooperative in New Zealand which supplies essentially 1/3 of all of the kiwi fruit, 1/3 of all of the high-end kiwi fruit in the world. Similarly, with dairy products, there are very successful cooperatives. So New Zealand is a good example. There are also other examples, say from India and other places, which are by which one can essentially use the cooperative movement to essentially achieve sustainability and simultaneously achieve globalization by feeding into global supply chains. So broadly speaking, the overall conclusion one can draw from this is that while globalization doesn't fit in perfectly with the notion of sustainability, it is possible to essentially achieve both of these, to achieve globalized supply chains which are also sustainable by essentially either by using standards that are shared by different players in the supply chain, or by having some coordination between say governments in different parts of the world, or by say using fair trade and the like. So it is possible to essentially to construct global supply chains that are sustainable. So even though there's an inherent contradiction, it can to some extent be reconciled using some of these measures. So again, that's essentially my presentation. As I mentioned, this is not really a mathematical modeling based presentation. It was just a broad discussion of issues. Many of these issues can be modeled. They can. So for instance, when one looks at treaties across, say, for instance, the California and Quebec, sharing standards and setting up similar systems, one can use game theory to see the benefits of having two different areas sharing standards and the benefits from that. So some of these issues can be modeled, but this was mainly meant to be a discussion, a presentation that focused on a discussion of some of the key issues. So again, so that was my presentation. So thank you again to Dr. Shah and to all of the other organizers. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer those questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful presentation on globalized supply chain.
Professor Ravi, I agree with that you are not having any mathematical modeling, but the way you present it, it seems that many of the researchers will have ideas where they can tackle down.
Right.
It is like a dynamic programming. One can go with part by part and can have a mathematical modeling.
Yes.
But it was a wonderful thing. At least I enjoyed it. I enjoyed good number of concepts which can be modeled. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now it's time to thank all our distinguished speakers for sharing their valuable comments on various topics. With this, our first day of this knowledge sharing program ends here. We are all being enlightened today.
Ekta madam, we will have a group photo of the speakers of today.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, you can stop sharing now.
Yes,
Yeah,
sure.
Jitendra sir, you can stop sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I request all the speakers to switch on their video, please. Sivraj sir. Sivraj sir, will you please switch on your video? Achha, he is in a car. Okay, no problem. Milan sir, please take it.
Okay, done, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody. Pujwan sir, you started with aspiration, and Ravi sir gave us good number of problems which can be tackled down by the research scholars. And Georgia, very good presentation. And give my regards to Skuri madam. So we end this session here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so formally I announce end of today's session. We will definitely meet again tomorrow for the next session at the same timing. So all participants, please note that the link for your feedback will be shared at the end of tomorrow's session. So today you will not receive any link. Once again, I thank all the speakers and participants for their active participation in this webinar. So I hope all the participants have enjoyed today's session. So stay home, stay safe. Have a good day. Thank you very much all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.